The Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will come to order. I would like to apologize for the temperature in here. Hopefully it will warm up as we proceed with our hearing today. If not, maybe we'll have to go out in the hallway and start dragging people in here to get the body heat. But hopefully we won't have to resort to that. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome members, witnesses, and our guests in the audience of today's hearing. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the Congressman from Washington, Mr. Baumgardner, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We are here today to hold an oversight hearing titled Sea Lion Predation in the Pacific Northwest. I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. This morning, the subcommittee will examine an issue that has only become more challenging in recent years: pinniped predation on threatened and endangered salmon and steelhead, and the conflicting requirements of the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. Pinniped refers to a category of marine mammal, including California sea lions, Steller sea lions, and harbor seals, among others. In the decades since the enactment of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, pinniped populations have exploded, and they are dominating ecosystems across the Pacific Northwest and devastating salmon and steelhead populations listed under the Endangered Species Act. The National Marine Fisheries Service has found on repeated occasions over the last 2 decades that pinniped predation is a leading factor in preventing the recovery of these salmon species. One study found that by 2015, across the Pacific coast, pinnipeds consumed 6 times the amount of Chinook salmon that were captured through commercial and recreational fishing combined. The imbalance between unchecked pinniped populations and their threatened and endangered prey causes significant challenges throughout the Pacific Northwest. In today's hearing, we will hear the perspective of tribes that bear the impacts and have led on pinniped management. To address this issue in the Columbia River, Congress enacted bipartisan legislation in 2018 authorizing the Secretary of Commerce to permit the Columbia River tribes and states of Washington, Idaho, and Oregon to conduct lethal take of pinnipeds based on their location in the Columbia River. Today's hearing provides us with an opportunity to examine the law's effectiveness and explore additional solutions to restore the balance between salmon and pinnipeds. The subcommittee is joined today by Asia DeCoteau, the Executive Director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, who will talk about the Columbia River tribe's experience in implementation of the 2018 statute, the effectiveness of legal take as a management tool to improve salmon abundance, and the considerable resources that our tribes and tribal organizations have devoted to recovering salmon populations. Tribes outside of the Columbia River Basin have also dealt with this issue, from the Oregon coast to the Puget Sound in Washington. I'd like to thank Chairman Ed Johnstone of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission and Chairman Ken Choke of the Nisqually Indian Tribe for joining us today to share their perspectives. Thank you both for being here. It is my hope that today's hearing gives us an opportunity to reflect on lessons learned from previous efforts so that we can craft solutions that effectively bring pinnipeds under control and facilitate the growth of healthy, sustainable salmon and steelhead populations. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for traveling to Washington to be here and their members for their interest in this very important issue. I now recognize Ranking Member Hoyle for her opening statements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, and thank you so much for being here today. This is a very, very important issue, especially representing the Pacific Northwest. We're going to discuss the impacts of sea lion predation on salmon in the Pacific Northwest, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this important issue for my state and this region. In 2018, Congress created a new tool to address the growing problem of sea lions at the Willamette Falls and Bonneville Dam. Sea lions were traveling 100 miles upstream and eating a salmon buffet in areas where they had learned that salmon would be concentrated, and why wouldn't they? But the issue is that their natural predators, orcas, do not travel upstream, and so what they have is a buffet and no natural predators. So ratepayers and the federal government invested billions of dollars to support threatened and endangered salmon, but that work was undermined by sea lions, which were a non-native species, and they learned and adopted a behavior that was devastating to our salmon population. At the time, the MMPA didn't have the necessary flexibility to allow state and tribal fish and wildlife managers to address this population-wide sea lion problem. Section 120F of the Marine Mammal Protection Act allows the states of Washington and Oregon, as well as the tribes on the Columbia River, to get a permit to manage problematic sea lions at key places along the Columbia River and its tributaries. Under this permit, we've seen that targeted management can work. At Oregon's Willamette Falls, removing approximately 20 male sea lions from the area reduced predation on winter steelhead from 25% to just 1.5%. This is a success story, and it shows what's possible with adequate resources and scientific monitoring. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today about the progress they've made using Section 120F authority, the resources they need to build on that success, and how we can keep working together in a bipartisan way to support comprehensive salmon recovery. Now, we can't have this discussion without dealing with the fact that with the massive cuts that would only put salmon in further jeopardy. For instance, the president's proposed budget would eliminate the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund. This is a long-standing and widely supported program that helps improve salmon habitat, provide local jobs and revenue, and supports recreation and tourism opportunities across the Northwest. There's also a proposed 40% cut to the National Marine Fisheries Services and the agency has already lost over 500 staff this year. I do strongly support the work being done on the grounds to address sea lion predation. Anyone who's ever talked to me about salmon knows that. But there are many other threats that we also must deal with. We have to address the habitat challenges, outdated hatchery infrastructure, and climate change in order to truly achieve salmon recovery in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you again to the witnesses for traveling here today to discuss these critical issues for our region, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Hoyle. I now recognize Chairman Westerman for his opening statement.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair Hageman, for holding this hearing. And I want to thank all the witnesses that have traveled to Washington today to talk about this very important subject, which the topic is a very important one. It's the Pinipid predation undermines decades of work and billions of dollars spent on recovery of threatened and endangered salmon and steelhead. Abundant sea lion and seal populations maintain strict protections under the Marine Mammal Protection Act at the expense of listed fish species. In fact, recent studies have found pinipid predation to be a primary driver of increasing mortality rates of salmon and steelhead in the Salish Sea. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the Nisqually tribe in Olympia, Washington, and in my visit, I learned about the tribe's salmon recovery and enhancement efforts and toured the Clear Creek hatchery. I learned about how the tribe wanted to get back to a more traditional diet that included more salmon. And then we took a boat down the river to Puget Sound, where I saw the seal haul-outs, like the one pictured behind me, right at the mouth of the Nisqually and in the flats. While on the river, the seals were unbothered by human activity in their vicinity. These pinipid congregations create unsafe conditions for fishery managers and the public in the vicinity. In a 2024 study, it was found that pinipids consume up to 1/3 of the steelhead run in the Nisqually River. These animals jeopardize food security and undermine the tribe's way of life. There's possibly no starker visual than the trackers from the fish hatchery showing up in the seal scat that littered throughout the area. And if I remember the numbers correctly, I think the tribe told me that about 90% of the trackers they put in the fish ended up there in the delta in seal scat, which that I think definitely implies we have a problem. As the Nisqually tribe continues to work to enhance salmon survival, due to the MMPA salmon recovery efforts feed a growing predator population. I want to thank Chairman Choke for joining us today to share his people's story. But the good news is that Congress has previously acted on a bipartisan basis to provide tribes in the region with additional management tools to address increasing pinniped populations. The Endangered Salmon Predation Prevention Act passed in 2018 and authorized the Columbia River tribes in the states of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho to cull these nuisance populations. I want to thank the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission for joining us today to explain how these tools have worked since enactment. Now, we know this issue is not limited to the Columbia River. Today's hearing gives members a chance to examine how this issue has persisted across the region and to explore other potential solutions. With that, Madam Chair, once again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here. I look forward to a robust discussion and look forward to legislation following after we have these hearings, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Huffman for his opening statements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a unanimous consent request. I'd like to enter into the record a recent peer-reviewed paper titled Climate Change Threatens Chinook Salmon Throughout Their Life Cycle. It is research about increasing sea surface temperatures, changes in river temperatures, altered flow patterns, and other things that are impairing smolt survival, which is really the key
Without
to
objection,
salmon
so
recovery.
ordered.
Thank you. So good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. I want to welcome our witnesses, and I do look forward to hearing from you. Today we are discussing the implementation of Section 120 of the MMPA, which allows lethal removal of sea lions in the Columbia River Basin to support salmon recovery. And predator management, if you really care about declining salmon populations, is one part of the conversation, but it is certainly not the only part or even the biggest part of what we should be talking about. For the past few decades, salmon populations have declined sharply because of habitat loss, because of dam construction, droughts, overharvest, all of these factors leading to multiple listings under the Endangered Species Act. The river system has been reshaped by people. Dams, fish ladders, fish passage bottlenecks, leaving us with very unnatural predator-prey interactions that did not exist historically. And in my district, salmon fishing is a way of life. I care about these things and know all too well about declining salmon populations. California salmon fishing communities have had unprecedented challenges, 3 consecutive ocean salmon season closures. So, Madam Chair, when you give statistics about pinnipeds eating dramatically more salmon than fishermen, you can play with those numbers, because for the past 3 years in places like California, the fleet hasn't been able to catch salmon at all. So it's no surprise that pinnipeds would be eating more than the commercial harvest. At the same time, we're watching real-time recovery of a historic salmon run where we did it right, where tribes, the state, and federal government collaborated on the difficult work of removing Klamath dams. And in a short time since, we have seen salmon return to places they haven't been in over a century. It is working. So I'll be frank, I'm glad Republicans are finally talking about salmon here in this committee today. But if killing even more sea lions than we already allow, and I support the targeted science-based intervention that we allow right now under current authority, but if that's the only thing you'll do for salmon, you're missing it. And we are still in big trouble here. Recovery of Pacific salmon requires habitat recovery and serious partnerships among tribes, states, and the federal government. Republicans have done the opposite. They've applauded the Trump administration for walking away from the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, a plan that would have delivered more than $1 billion in federal investment over the next decade for wild fish restoration across the basin and clean energy project for tribes. And on top of that, Republicans rescinded IRA funding that would have gone towards salmon and marine mammal research. And they've done nothing to stop DOGE from wreaking havoc at NOAA. I'm glad you're here, Mr. Rauch. We should be having a conversation about the fact that you are now the chief cook and bottled washer at this critical agency, and I'm so sorry that your scientists and your actual salmon recovery funding has been gutted under the watch of this administration. House Republicans have put forward a NOAA appropriations bill that guts National Marine Fisheries Service by 40% and acts as 44% of NOAA's Pacific salmon budget. But today, we hear that they care about salmon, and I just wonder, who do they think they're kidding? You can't champion salmon recovery while slashing the very programs designed to rebuild habitat, recover river function, and uphold tribal rights. You can't walk away from basin-wide restoration agreements and then point to sea lions as the problem. Claiming to care about salmon recovery only when you get to kill off another species is not conservation. I don't know what it is, but it's not serious conservation. My goal today is to hear from our witnesses what is really working and what isn't, and how we can support salmon recovery. It's great to try to avoid extinction, and I do support targeted science-based interventions like what the ranking member mentioned at Willamette Falls. That is going to be necessary in the short term, but we have to think about recovery. And that's an entirely different and I think even more urgent conversation. So I hope today we will ask hard questions, listen to our tribal partners, and ground our decisions in data, addressing root causes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
I will now introduce our first panel of witnesses. Mr. Samuel Rauch, the Deputy Assistant Administrator of the National Marine Fisheries Service in Washington, D.C. Under committee rules, you must limit your oral statement to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the button on the microphone, and we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I now recognize Mr. Rauch for 5 minutes.